You close the book, stare at the ceiling, and realize something that makes you uncomfortable. The words are still fresh in your mind. The stories are familiar. The verses have been repeated since childhood, yet the question sitting in your chest refuses to move. It is not a question about whether the Bible is true or false. It is something much more personal than that. Why do some questions seem to survive every answer you have ever been given? Maybe you have experienced this yourself. You ask someone you trust about suffering, injustice, fear, unanswered prayers, or why two sincere people can read the same passage and reach completely different conclusions. They respond with confidence, and for a few minutes your anxiety settles. Then later, when you are alone, the same question quietly returns. It does not arrive with anger. It arrives with silence. It arrives while you are driving home, lying awake at night, or watching someone you love go through something that feels impossible to explain. Suddenly you realize the real struggle is not simply finding an answer. It is understanding why some questions continue living inside people, even after they believe they have solved them. Human beings have always searched for certainty. We want a sentence that removes doubt forever, a belief that protects us from uncertainty, a conclusion that allows us to stop searching. Yet life rarely behaves that way. Every generation inherits ancient texts, traditions, philosophies, and explanations, but every generation also encounters new experiences that force old questions to be asked again. The Bible has been read for centuries by people seeking hope, comfort, wisdom, correction, and meaning. At the same time, it has also been read by people wrestling with grief, disappointment, skepticism, and confusion. Those very different readers often arrive carrying very different expectations. Sometimes they discover peace. Sometimes they discover more questions than they expected. Perhaps that is less surprising than we think. A text can be profoundly meaningful without functioning as an automatic answer to every personal struggle. The deeper issue may not be what the text says, but what each of us hopes it will do for us. Maybe we expect certainty where life only offers trust. Maybe we expect complete explanations where reality remains mysterious. Or perhaps we expect words on a page to remove fears that are rooted much deeper inside the human mind. Think about a moment when someone asked you a question you genuinely could not answer. You probably did not become less intelligent in that moment. You simply reached the edge of what you knew. Every worldview, whether religious, philosophical, or secular, eventually encounters that same edge. The question then becomes how people respond when they arrive there. Some become defensive, some become curious, some walk away, others continue searching with greater humility. If you have ever found yourself standing between belief and uncertainty, between confidence and confusion, then you are far from alone. Throughout history, thoughtful people have wrestled with questions that resisted simple resolution. Some emerged with stronger faith. Others embraced different philosophical perspectives. Many discovered that the process of questioning changed them more than any single conclusion ever could. If you have experienced something similar, share your perspective below. Not because there is one correct experience, but because these moments often reveal something deeply human about all of us. What makes these questions so persistent is that they are rarely only intellectual. Imagine someone who has just lost a loved one. Another person may offer theological explanations, philosophical reflections, or scientific descriptions of mortality. Each may contain insight, yet none can fully remove grief. That is because grief is not simply waiting for information, it is waiting for healing. The same is true for fear, loneliness, regret, guilt, and hope. We often believe we are searching for answers when, in reality, we are searching for peace. Those are not always the same thing. This realization changes the entire conversation. Instead of asking whether a book, a philosophy, or an ideology can answer every question, perhaps we should also ask what kind of questions we are actually bringing. Are they questions of evidence, morality, identity, meaning, or emotional survival? Different questions require different kinds of responses. Sometimes, we mistakenly expect one source to carry every burden. That expectation can lead either to disappointment or to unrealistic certainty. Neither serves us particularly well. There is another uncomfortable possibility. Perhaps the hardest questions are valuable precisely because they remain difficult. Questions force reflection. They expose assumptions we did not know we carried. They reveal fears hidden beneath confident words. They challenge us to distinguish between inherited beliefs and personally examined convictions. Whether someone approaches life through religion, philosophy, science, or some combination of them, that process of honest examination can become deeply transformative. The danger is not in asking difficult questions. The danger is convincing ourselves that difficult questions should never be asked. Intellectual curiosity and sincere faith have often existed side by side throughout history, even if they occasionally create tension. Likewise, skepticism and humility are not enemies. A person can question respectfully without mocking another person's convictions. They can defend deeply held beliefs without pretending every mystery has disappeared. Perhaps maturity begins when we recognize that certainty and humility are not opposites, but partners. The most thoughtful conversations rarely end with someone declaring complete victory. Instead, they end with everyone understanding the complexity of the human condition a little more clearly than before. As we continue, another realization begins to emerge, one that is less about any single religious text and more about ourselves. The question that seems impossible to answer may not reveal the limits of a book nearly as much as it reveals the limits of every human attempt to make sense of existence. That possibility is uncomfortable because it shifts the focus away from proving someone else wrong and toward examining our own expectations, assumptions, fears, and longing for certainty. And that may be where the deepest part of this journey truly begins. The more you examine this tension, the more you may notice that people often defend certainty for reasons that have very little to do with logic alone. Imagine two friends who have experienced the exact same tragedy. One loses faith completely because the event shattered every expectation they had about justice. The other clings to faith even more tightly because it becomes the only source of hope that keeps them moving forward. The same experience leads to opposite conclusions. That should make us pause. It suggests that our beliefs are rarely formed by evidence alone. They are also shaped by memory, relationships, culture, personality, fear, resilience, disappointment, gratitude, and countless experiences that cannot easily be measured. This is not an accusation against religious belief or against skepticism. It is an observation about human psychology. We are storytelling creatures before we are purely rational ones. We instinctively search for narratives that help us organize chaos into something that feels survivable. Every worldview, whether religious or secular, attempts to answer questions that science alone cannot settle. Questions such as what gives life meaning? Why should we choose compassion instead of cruelty when selfishness appears easier? How do we continue after unbearable loss? What makes forgiveness possible? Why does beauty affect us so deeply? None of these questions disappear simply because someone adopts or rejects a particular belief system. They remain part of the human experience. That is why debates about religion often become so emotionally charged. On the surface, people appear to be arguing about texts, history, miracles, or philosophy. Underneath, they are often protecting something much more vulnerable. They are protecting identity, family, memories, belonging, or hope. When someone feels those things are threatened, the conversation easily becomes defensive. Suddenly the goal is no longer understanding. The goal becomes survival. Perhaps you have experienced this yourself. Maybe you asked a sincere question and felt that people assumed you were attacking them. Or perhaps someone questioned something deeply important to you, and you immediately felt misunderstood before they had even finished speaking. That reaction reveals something important. Human beings often experience challenges to their worldview as challenges to themselves. Separating ideas from identity is remarkably difficult. Yet without making that distinction, meaningful conversations become almost impossible. Consider how often people ask impossible questions of every philosophy they encounter. They ask religion to eliminate every mystery. They ask science to provide meaning. They ask psychology to erase suffering. They ask relationships to remove loneliness forever. They ask success to produce lasting fulfillment. Again and again, human beings expect finite systems to satisfy infinite longings. When those expectations fail, disappointment follows. But perhaps disappointment is not always evidence that something is worthless. Sometimes it simply reveals that we expected more than any single source was ever designed to provide. This possibility changes the way we approach difficult questions. Instead of asking why one tradition cannot explain every aspect of existence, perhaps we begin asking whether complete explanation is even available to beings as limited as ourselves. Imagine standing beside the ocean with a small glass. However many times you fill it, the ocean remains larger than what the glass can contain. The limitation is not necessarily the ocean, it is also the size of the container. Human understanding may work in much the same way. We long to comprehend reality completely, yet our perspective is inevitably shaped by finite experience. Recognizing that limitation can feel frustrating at first, but it may also become liberating. It allows us to replace the pressure of absolute certainty with the discipline of continual learning. If this idea resonates with you, or if you completely disagree with it, share your perspective below. Some of the most meaningful conversations begin when people explain not only what they believe, but why they believe it. Those stories often reveal far more than abstract arguments ever could. Think back to childhood. Most people accepted countless ideas without carefully examining them because trusted adults introduced those ideas long before critical thinking fully developed. As we grow older, many of us begin revisiting those assumptions. Sometimes they become stronger after examination. Sometimes they change. Sometimes they become more nuanced. That process can feel frightening because it often creates temporary uncertainty. Yet uncertainty is not always a sign that someone is lost. Sometimes it is evidence that they have begun asking deeper questions than they asked before. There is another layer that deserves attention. We often assume that having answers automatically produces peace. Yet history and everyday life suggest otherwise. Many people who express complete confidence still struggle with anxiety, loneliness, anger, or despair. Likewise, many people who openly acknowledge uncertainty demonstrate remarkable compassion, courage, and emotional stability. This does not prove one worldview superior to another. It simply reminds us that intellectual certainty and emotional well-being do not always move together. The human heart is more complicated than that. Perhaps the deepest transformation occurs not when every question disappears, but when our relationship with uncertainty changes. Instead of viewing uncertainty as an enemy, we begin treating it as an invitation to humility. We become more willing to listen before responding. We become less interested in winning arguments and more interested in understanding people. We recognize that behind nearly every deeply held conviction stands a human story, and behind every difficult question stands someone searching for meaning in a world that often refuses to provide easy answers. As that realization settles in, another question quietly begins to emerge. It is a question that reaches beyond debates about religion, philosophy, or evidence. It asks whether our greatest fear has ever truly been uncertainty itself, or whether our greatest fear is discovering that certainty was never the foundation on which a meaningful life had to be built in the first place. That possibility is unsettling because it asks us to exchange the comfort of final answers for the ongoing work of wisdom, empathy, and honest reflection. And if there is any lesson that seems to echo across generations regardless of belief, it may be this. The search for truth is rarely diminished by humility, but it is often distorted by the illusion that one human perspective can fully contain the mystery of existence. Eventually you reach a moment that almost everyone encounters, whether they recognize it or not. It usually arrives quietly. There is no dramatic music, no life-changing speech, no unmistakable sign that everything is about to change. It happens while washing dishes after a funeral, sitting alone in a parked car after an argument, staring at a hospital ceiling, holding a newborn child for the first time, or watching the person you love slowly become a stranger. In those moments, the questions that once seemed purely philosophical suddenly become intensely personal. They are no longer about winning debates or defending positions. They become questions about how to continue living when certainty feels out of reach. Perhaps that is why conversations about religion, meaning, and purpose have endured for thousands of years. They are not sustained merely by intellectual curiosity. They persist because they intersect with every joy and every wound that human beings experience. We search because we hope that somewhere there is a perspective capable of making sense of both extraordinary beauty and unbearable suffering. Yet life repeatedly reminds us that no single sentence has ever erased grief, prevented every tragedy, or removed every doubt. This realization can initially feel disappointing, but there is another way to understand it. Maybe the value of profound questions has never been that they produce universally satisfying answers. Maybe their value lies in how they transform the people courageous enough to wrestle with them honestly. Think about the people who have influenced your life the most. Chances are they were not individuals who claimed to know everything. More often, they were people who combined conviction with humility, confidence with compassion, and belief with a willingness to listen. They understood that wisdom is measured not only by the answers someone gives, but also by the quality of the questions they continue asking. That kind of humility does not weaken conviction. In many cases, it strengthens it, because it is no longer dependent upon pretending that every mystery has already been solved. Instead, it grows through experience, reflection, and the recognition that understanding is always incomplete. This may be the uncomfortable truth hiding beneath the title of this conversation. When someone says the Bible cannot answer this, another person may immediately disagree and point to passages that have guided countless lives. Someone else may insist that no religious text could ever answer the question they carry. Both reactions reveal something important. Often the real issue is not whether a particular answer exists, it is whether that answer speaks to the unique experience of the person asking. Two individuals can hear the exact same explanation and walk away in opposite directions because they are not standing in the same emotional place. One hears hope, another hears silence. One finds reassurance, another continues searching. That does not necessarily mean either person is dishonest. It reminds us that human beings do not interpret reality from identical starting points. Every conclusion passes through memory, personality, relationships, expectations, fears, and hopes before it becomes part of someone's worldview. Recognizing this does not require abandoning conviction. It requires acknowledging complexity. Complexity is uncomfortable because it resists simple narratives. We naturally prefer stories with clear heroes, obvious villains, and definitive endings. Real life rarely offers those conveniences. Instead, it presents faithful people who struggle, skeptics who live with deep integrity, believers who ask difficult questions, doubters who long for meaning, and ordinary individuals who spend decades trying to reconcile their experiences with the stories they inherited. Perhaps the most meaningful conversations occur when none of those people feel forced to defend their humanity before they are allowed to express their perspective. Imagine how different public discussions would become if curiosity consistently replaced assumptions. Instead of asking how someone could possibly believe or disbelieve something, we might ask what experiences shaped their journey. Instead of assuming that disagreement reflects ignorance or bad intentions, we might recognize that sincere people often reach different conclusions while asking many of the same questions. Such conversations would not eliminate disagreement, but they could replace contempt with understanding. That alone would represent remarkable progress. There is another realization worth considering. Many of the greatest achievements in human history began with someone refusing to stop asking difficult questions. Scientific discoveries emerged because accepted explanations were examined more carefully. Philosophical breakthroughs appeared because familiar assumptions were challenged. Moral progress often required societies to confront ideas they once accepted without hesitation. Yet questioning alone is not enough. Questions without humility become arrogance. Convictions without reflection become rigidity. The healthiest search for truth may require both the courage to question and the willingness to recognize that our own understanding remains limited. This balance protects us from two opposite dangers. One is believing that every tradition, belief, or philosophy must already contain every answer we seek. The other is believing that because complete certainty remains elusive, nothing has value at all. Between those extremes lies a quieter path, one that accepts mystery without surrendering curiosity and values conviction without demanding absolute certainty. Perhaps that path feels less dramatic than endless arguments, but it often proves more fruitful over a lifetime. Before this journey ends, consider one final possibility. Maybe the question that has occupied your mind throughout this reflection was never intended to expose the weakness of a particular book, belief, or worldview. Maybe it was intended to expose something inside all of us, our tendency to crave guarantees in a world that offers very few, our desire for certainty when life repeatedly teaches us resilience instead, our instinct to search for someone or something that will remove every doubt, every fear, and every contradiction. Yet despite all our progress, every generation still falls in love, still grieves, still hopes, still fears death, still searches for justice, still wonders why suffering exists, and still asks what gives life meaning. Those questions have survived civilizations because they are woven into the human condition itself. Whether one finds guidance primarily through sacred texts, philosophical inquiry, scientific exploration, personal experience, or a combination of these, the journey remains profoundly human. It demands honesty, patience, humility, and the courage to keep listening, even when easy answers prove insufficient. If this reflection has challenged you, comforted you, unsettled you, or led you to see the conversation differently, share your perspective. Not to settle the debate forever, but because thoughtful dialogue reminds us that behind every worldview is a person navigating the same fragile reality we all inhabit. In the end, perhaps the most important discovery is not whether every question can be answered to everyone's satisfaction. Perhaps it is that the search itself has the power to make us more compassionate, more thoughtful, and more aware of both the depth of our convictions and the limits of our understanding. And if that is true, then the greatest lesson may not be found in finally reaching the end of every question, but in becoming the kind of person who continues seeking truth without losing empathy for those whose journey has led them somewhere different.